Situation is more than we can handle, Planeteers. We need help.
You mean...
Exactly. We must do as Gaia advised. We must combine our powers. Let's do it! Let our powers combine. Earth! Fire!
Wind! Water!
Heart!
By your powers combined, I am Captain Planet!
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Let me pop my teeth out real quick. That way I can enunciate better. I just forgot to take my teeth out. Give me a break. I'm your host, Andy, and as always, I'm here with Anthony, one of the brightest stars in my life, Maddox.
Aw, that's so sweet.
You're a bright star in my night sky.
Shining, parallel light, whatever that thing is.
Parallel light? What? What?
You don't know that about stars?
No, what are you talking
They're
about?
so far away that they... This is totally not important. They consider the light from a star to be parallel, like all of the individual photon rays.
Because it's...
unlike light from the sun, which is, sort of more of a slight cone.
Interesting. Fascinating stuff.
Anyway, this is just some
this
of
is why
some of
you're
the
one of the brightest stars in my
random
life.
shit that I can tell you
This
about.
is a episode that in some ways has been a long time coming, only because this format we've been playing a little bit for the past week has been a long time coming. How many times did we sit down at Cube Night and the pods broke down in such a way that we had 5 people looking at each other thinking, well, I guess we're a pod of 5. And you or I were like, it's time.
It's
for
time.
Star Magic. And then right at the last minute, either somebody dropped or a 6th person walked up and we were just like, I guess we're not doing Star Magic today. That happened so many times over the past 4 years.
I mean, I'm going to say it happened twice, but that's surprising. And I feel like the first time it kind of, maybe it was more than that. Maybe I should give us a little bit of credit. It sort of felt like a little bit of a joke of like, ooh, let's do this weird thing that we've never tried before. Let's play Star Magic.
I personally have tried to make it happen at least 4 times.
Convince everybody and get everybody on board. And then the 6th player shows up and it's like, we're glad you're here. And this does
drafting
seem
is
better,
probably better,
and we'll do
yeah.
a team draft. But man, I really kind of wanted to try that Star Magic thing.
Here's the context for this episode. If you are hosting a local play group and you're trying to run a Cube Night, one of the most important rules is that everybody drafts. No matter how many people show up, you should be willing and able to fire with everybody so everybody can play, which means that you sometimes have to work with numbers of people that are not quite ideal. And, between 2 and 8, I think the 2 most cursed numbers of players are 3 and 5.
Easily. I'm not sure which takes the cake between those. 7, I would argue, is also a little bit rough, but you think 7 is the perfect number, and that's a different story.
Whole different story there. I mean, 7 at least, then you have 3 other matches going on, so there's so much less downtime because you only have to wait for 1 of 3 matches to end before you get to hop in, and 3 and 5 are both pretty cursed. So in our mission to furnish everybody with the tools they need to build their local playgroup and run their Cube Night, we are talking about this format, which I did some digging, Anthony, and I could not find someone to credit with this format. Kelly Diggs is a former employee of Wizards of the Coast that wrote about it on the mothership, a couple decades ago. But in the article, which I found in some archive, he doesn't say he designed it. And so it's clear he just, is aware of it. So don't know who designed this. I get the sense maybe it goes back to, the earliest days of Magic, because it's a format where you play a 5-player free-for-all, except each player's win condition is that the 2 players sitting furthest from them have lost the game. So your win condition in your seat, you don't really care what happens to the people on the other side of you because they're kind of half allies, half enemies. You just have to defeat the other 2 points of the star, as it were. And I think this harkens back to Magic's Color Pie and the, 5 points you can find on the back of every Magic card. And that's why it's called Star Magic, not Pentagon Magic, because you care about those diagonals more than you care about, the shape you're sitting in.
I would not be surprised if this goes back to, like you said, literally Richard Garfield's initial design, because Richard Garfield was working on a game called, what was it called? It was called The 5 Colors, I think, and early Magic really emphasized the idea of there being enemy and allied colors, and just like you're describing on the back of the Magic card, you've got this little wheel, and white is next to blue, so they're allies, but white is across from red, so they're enemies, and that was really fundamental to the way they designed cards, the way they thought about the game, so I would not be surprised if some of the earliest games of Magic played were with this structure. We as cube designers, we have specific needs of just it's kind of hard to play with 5 people, and this kind of arcane way of playing seemed kind of interesting.
This is something we've been wanting to do. I heard about this, but knew about it for years before we got to try it. And whatever happened, the stars aligned, as it were, a week ago. We had a pot of 5, and we finally did it. We did our first, night of Star Magic. And
we were just waiting for 6:30 to tick over so we could officially say that some mysterious 6th player wasn't going to appear.
And since then, I also did it at our Friday Magic mornings, and then we did it again this past Tuesday, just yesterday, to further furnish ourselves with some information about this format so we could talk about it and be fully informed.
So you've done 5 games of Star Magic.
I've played 5 games of Star Magic in the last 7 days.
Would you say that's a nice round career in Star Magic, or are you going to stick with this format a little bit more?
Something else I want to be clear about is that if you look this up on the internet, you will find a page on the MTG wiki which describes it as a format for constructed Magic. And the idea of Star Magic as a constructed Magic format is each deck is only one of the colors of Magic. So you are the white deck, your enemies are literally the red and black decks, and you're sitting across from them. That's not really what we're talking about, because we're talking about Cube here, and we're talking about a way to draft with 5 players. So we're going to be talking about drafting and then playing Star Magic games, which there's a lot of precedence for. But the other thing I'll say is that there is no canonical list of rules that I could find online. So I think we're going to be kind of establishing what we think you should do if you want to do Star Magic. But obviously, this is a game. You can change any of these rules if they work better or not for your play group. Should we just dig into the actual detailed rules as we are proposing them, Anthony?
Let's do it.
So, 5-player draft. I personally, at 5 players for this format, just like doing 4 smaller packs. So normal booster draft, no burning, no, weird houseman, no face-up information, just, 4 smaller packs. You prefer packs of 11, which is closer to 45 cards, you end up with 44 cards instead. I like to juice it a little bit, and I go to packs of 12. Also, I did discover that with a 360-card cube, you end up drafting exactly 3/4 of the cube if you do packs of 12, I think, which was interesting for the purposes of doing 2 back-to-back, which is what we were able to do on a couple of these nights, was basically in the time it takes, an 8-player pod to fire and do all 3 matches, you could do a draft, a Star Magic game, another draft, another Star Magic game. And in that case, with a 360-card cube, it was cool to say, all right, well, 2 of the remaining packs of 4 you have are going to be from cards we haven't seen yet, and 2 of the remaining packs of 4 are going to be from cards we already saw that are being reshuffled. I'm getting distracted. We should focus on just the rules.
Yeah, so it's just a standard booster draft, and like we often recommend, and how we prefer to draft with smaller groups, is just alter the pack size so you're not looking at that same 15 cards go around the table 4 times, and instead you get what feels a little bit more familiar. And you can play with those numbers, but yeah, I think 5 of 9 is also a good option, or 4x11 or 4x12.
Yeah, as long as it comes up to roughly 45 and some number of booster packs that is close enough to twice the table size, I think you're pretty good.
And then, just like a normal booster draft, everybody's going to add basic lands and build a 40-card deck.
Correct. And I should say, you said just like a normal booster draft, we are also playing, in all these instances, cubes that were not designed for Star Magic. And so if your cube is a desert cube, you wouldn't have basic lands. And we're going to talk about this as a format you can just pick up and play with any cube. And we'll talk about why some particular cube design tendencies might be better set up to do this than others, but we did this with cubes that were not designed with Star Magic in mind at all, that were designed, to be normal 1v1 cubes.
Regular cubes, you might say.
Regular cubes. We also played that you sit in the same seat you drafted in for the pod, so you randomize ahead of time, what seats you're sitting in. An easy way to do that is just to get one of each basic land and hand them out randomly and then sit in that color order around the table.
It's perfect, and if you forget that order, just flip over a Magic card.
Correct. 20 points of life, importantly. It is a multiplayer game, so we've played that you draw on the beginning of the first turn, even if you're the starting player. We have not played with free mulligans. My sort of headcanon is that the free mulligan thing is a commander thing, not an explicitly multiplayer thing.
I always thought of it as a 100-card deck thing, because there's
maybe
technically a little more variance there.
You obviously could play with free mulligans if you want. We didn't. We played normal mulligan rules, and there seemed to be no problems with that. I guess the argument is if you're only playing literally one game with the deck, and you just want to minimize the chance that, you get mana screwed and have to mull to 5 or whatever, I could see the argument for it, but I have not found it necessary to adjust the mulligan rule. Then you play Magic. The starting player, whoever rolls highest or however you want to decide, goes first, and you play a normal game of Magic.
You can all just agree that the best basic land type gets to go first, and that will not be a difficult argument among your play group, I'm sure.
Correct. Here's where we get into some of the details of other rule sets. I know that a couple people feel strongly that when you're playing Star Magic, you should pass the turn in the star pattern, meaning you skip one player to your left and go to the person next to them, such that if you were to be looking down at the table from a sky perspective, the turn order would actually draw a star. We've done both at this point. The first 3 times I did Star Magic, we just passed in normal turn order, passed to the left around the table, and then last night, in order to test whether or not this made much of a difference, we did it passing in star pattern. I'm fairly convinced after just doing this for, 2 games, not a huge sample size, that it basically doesn't matter, and passing in star pattern adds a little hiccup of confusion and just like extra thought that I don't think is necessary for the format.
Yeah, I think the star pattern passing, it felt kind of cool for maybe the first half of the first game, and then I was like, this is just a little extra friction, and as soon as somebody forgets and like starts taking a turn, untapping, drawing lands, playing their lands when they shouldn't, then it's like, okay, this isn't worth it.
You could all argue in the comments. I'm not going to engage with this, but the theory for why it is better to pass in star pattern is because you then, quote unquote, get to take your turn between your enemies, which is to say, you get the turn passed to you by one of your 2 enemies, and then when you're done, you pass to your other enemy. Now, obviously, every player is getting 1 turn per cycle, right? So no matter how you pass the turns, your enemies are always going to get to go back to back before you go. It's just a question of whether or not your allies are in between them, right? I felt pretty strongly after doing this both ways that it doesn't matter. Whenever I do Star Magic again in the future, I will be strongly advocating for just passing in normal turn order, but that is a option available to you should you want to give it a try.
I agree. It didn't seem to make that much of a difference in the end.
One of the players in our playgroup that was advocating for that after doing it twice was like, yeah, I didn't feel any difference. So there's another data point for you if you need one. Other rules. Any card in the cube that refers to each player, obviously, refers to all 5 players at the table. So your, Accursed Marauders or whatever, or your Jace Balerans change quite a bit in what they do because now they're drawing cards or making players sacrifice creatures for every player at the table. That scales up quite a bit. Any card that refers to each opponent only refers to your 2 enemies. And this is also a little weird. I feel strongly this is how it should be done, but we mentioned that, like, the people sitting across the table are enemies from you, and the other people are sort of allies, as in you have 1 shared enemy and 1 shared ally between your neighbors you're sitting across from.
But no real shared investment to collaborate outside of having that 1 shared enemy. Like, you're not winning as a team. You are individually still trying to win.
You're individually still trying to win. So at some point in the game, in every game I've played, a player that was otherwise your friendly ally, quote unquote, does become your enemy because you're like, well, I'm sitting to the right of you, and I can see on board that if I pass to you, you're going to kill that last remaining player that you need to kill to win the game, so I would lose. And so I can't let you do that, and now I'm going to actually be using my spells to, disrupt you or even attacking you. The fact that each opponent only refers to your actual opponents across the table is maybe a little bit contentious, but I think is how that should work.
Oh yeah, I feel very strongly about that. And I feel like, there's a couple different types of cards that will matter for. There's something like Grey Merchant of Asphodel or a Plague Wind that just is going to impact certain players in a big way. That makes much more sense to me to just be able to affect those opponents. Or cards that, trigger when a creature an opponent controls dies. Those types of effects that would just scale in, like, crazy ways often if everybody was considered your opponent. There's other cards that are, like, targeted things. So if I'm playing Mana War, I still have the flexibility because it says return any target creature to bounce either an ally or an opponent's card. Whereas Exclusion Mage, which just says bounce an opponent's creature, would be more limited. So I feel like if you are designing a cube specific to this, those are the kinds of cards that I would be interested in sort of being a little bit critical of. And I really like the cards that do allow you to interact with your allies as well.
And let's maybe talk at the end about just like some high-level cube design tips for if you want to design for this format, with the caveat that neither of us have done that, but we've played it a little bit, and so maybe we have some thoughts about that. So anyway, each player is each player. Each opponent is only your 2 opponents. The last rule that has to be clarified is whether or not you should be allowed to attack your allies if you want to.
Well, before that, just to also clarify a point, allies remain the same throughout the game. So if somebody gets knocked out, you don't reshuffle who your enemy is. You're still just caring about the same 2 players you started the game caring about.
Correct, exactly. From reading some documentation online and talking with some other people, it seems like some people feel you should not be able to attack your allies. Again, there is no hard and fast rules for this format because I couldn't find any. We're going to publish a page on our website. We actually have had a page. We're going to update the page on our website about this format. And there, I feel also very strongly, just like that each opponent should only refer to your 2 enemies, I feel very strongly you ought to be able to attack your ally. Mostly for the reason I just mentioned, where like you could reach a point in the game where you are clearly going to lose because your person sitting next to you is about to win as soon as they untap. And if you're not allowed to attack them, then your hands are just kind of tied. And it makes no sense to me in a game that's about strategy and agency to tie your hands at that sort of point. Plus, I also think it's kind of cool to have the lines of like, hey, attack into my Perilous Mirror, and then I'll kill, our shared enemy's creature. Or attack into my Solemn Simulacrum to hope I draw a removal spell for that card that we're all worried about or whatever. I just think that's cool and pure upside. I feel very strongly you should be able to attack whatever player you want, but the win condition is obviously that your two enemies, people sitting across from you, have lost the game.
I think I agree with you, having tried it a little bit both ways. Yeah, the gameplay just did feel a little bit better. You had a little bit more flexibility. You did have more sort of control and agency in the late game. I do feel like if we interpreted the rules of Magic a little bit strictly, it would definitely not work that way. Like, I think this is a pretty significant alteration to, like, the base rules of Magic and, like,
how?
The way you consider a teammate versus...
But they're not a teammate. That's the important thing.
Sort
like,
of.
This is an individual game.
Breaking that, like, I feel very strongly.
Not a team.
I feel very strongly that the like cards that affect opponent versus ally should work. And like, you know, there's some cards from Battle Bond that let you like help your teammates pay for mana. Like, I think you should be able to treat
I would say that
teammates.
I would assume that anything it says your teammates may would absolutely not be able to. Like, to me, teams are like you're taking the turn at the same time. That's what a team is.
That's true.
Two-headed giant is teams. Battle Bond, you're taking the turn simultaneously.
What
that's
about
when
Surge? I just want Surge to work. Is that what the mechanic is called?
You can tweak whatever. That's whenever if you cast a spell prior to this,
right? But if it's specifically you or a teammate has cast a prior spell, so you can sort of collaborate on stuff like that.
Well, but again, that's because you take your turns at the same time when you're on a team, so they could cast a sorcery and then you could cast your sorcery with Surge. Like, that would be so much harder to pull off taking turns separately.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a deviation from Magic rules. I think it is actually a deviation to say you can't attack a player in a multiplayer game. That seems weird to me. Now, I will say, I think this will rarely come up. I don't think it came up at all in any of the games that I have played, but I think it could, and in the event that it does, I think you should be able to attack your quote-unquote allies, because again, they're not your teammates. It has not come up that I've seen a player attack their teammate, but it has absolutely come up in every single game that a player has used a removal spell or an inaccurate spell to disrupt the person that is otherwise their supposed ally, because it was strategically correct for them to do so. Like,
right, yeah.
I think it's important to think about the format not as a team format, because it's not a format where the politics are really interesting. And it's one of the things I like about this format is that it's not just every player for themselves, and it's also not just teams, you know, line drawn in the sand. It is like actual geopolitics in some sense, where it's like every player you have some shared interest in or some shared animosity against, but there is no player with whom you share a perfect sort of alignment of strategy and goals, which I think is really interesting. I think it's important you think about each player as an individual solo player for the game to make sense.
I think ultimately I agree with you. There is a little bit of weirdness there. Most importantly, just be sure about what you like. Agree with everybody you're playing with before the game, because the situation you don't want to get into is somebody says, "Oh, I do this," and it's, you know, a thing I've been planning for 3 turns, and now everybody's saying I can't do it. So just be clear ahead of time.
I think that's all the rules. Should we go on to our first impressions, having played this a few times now?
Yeah, overall, I think I really enjoyed the format, and we have been maybe a little bit critical of multiplayer formats in the past, and yeah, I feel pretty strongly that, like, multiplayer free-for-all is not my favorite way to play Magic, because I really enjoy the aspects about sort of, being on the same page with my opponents, that we are both trying to win, and that kind of puts us in a place where it's like, I can infer things that you're doing to try to win and make decisions about what I'm doing to counter that based on, like, those known expectations. And so much of that goes out the window in free-for-all multiplayer, where it's like, well, I don't really want to do the optimal thing of just attacking you when you have no blockers, because then you're going to have a grudge against me and you're going to attack me back. And like, there's all this like weird sort of sticky politics that I really don't like.
Which, it's worth noting, a lot of players do. Like what you're basically saying is that you like to be able to completely write off emotions in your anticipated reactions from your opponent. And,
yeah, I think that's fair.
And just say, like, based on game actions, I should be able to predict the behavior of my opponent because I understand their goals in this game and can make a strategic assessment of, like, what game actions make sense in that context. Whereas in games of Commander or other free-for-all multiplayer, people are just like, I don't care. I know it means me dead on board, but I'm just going to attack you because I'm mad at you. And it's like, well, if you're making decisions for that reason, and I'm making decisions for anything that has to do with like game strategy, then we're just not speaking the same language, and now I don't enjoy this anymore.
Exactly. And even though Star Magic is also a multiplayer format, it feels so much different and feels much closer to one-on-one Magic. Would you agree, in terms of just like the way the gameplay and the kind of strategy you could do?
I think it's a really nice in-between, because I agree that there's not the, typical 4-player multiplayer paralysis of like, well, right now nobody's my enemy, and so I don't want to attack somebody to then like have a enemy at the table. I want to kind of like basically just hold back and just like play as conservatively as possible. That sort of what I would describe as toxic trait of multiplayer Magic is not really present, because you have...
We're going to get comments about this.
Because you have 2 very clear established enemies from the start. And so like nobody's like, why are you attacking me? It's like, well, you're attacking me because you have to kill me to win the game. Like,
right.
It is much closer to like one-on-one Magic in that sense. So yeah, I think it's a really nice in-between in terms of like the level of how much politics or like, the less sort of predictable aspects of the game matter. Like, there are political aspects for sure.
Definitely.
But I think it is much more sort of in balance with regular game strategy tactics of like, well, okay, I need to attack and block this way and remove that thing and like, do what I have to do to sort of advance the game.
And I think there's a really, really key reason for that difference, because in a 4-player or 5-player free-for-all, you are greatly advantaged to just not pissing anybody off and sitting back and hoping to be the last one standing. Like, you are just happy to have your opponents interfere with each other, disrupt each other, deal damage to each other, and just sit back and wait and have some combo come out of nowhere. Like, that is kind of an optimal strategy in a free-for-all. You can't do that in Star Magic. If you decide to just sit back, put up walls, you will lose, because somebody else will manage to defeat both of their opponents. So, like, everybody is much more on the same page about, like, if you want to win, you have to be proactive.
That was the other thing that I was pleasantly surprised by with Star Magic, is that, again, these cubes were not designed for multiplayer Magic, and I think the sort of commonly held knowledge is that if you jump from 1v1 Magic to multiplayer Magic, being really aggressive just like is no longer as good. If you're trying to get your opponent's life total to 0, now you have 2 opponents you have to get to 0. That means your aggro deck is like already out of the gate half as good as it would otherwise be.
Plus,
and
all
also,
the like wraths and board wipes and things get way more powerful, so you're just more likely to see those come up in games rather than sitting in sideboards, which it just makes aggro really tough.
The biggest thing I think is what you said, is that like that game theory strategy of like, well, look, the less I have to do and the more I can just survive and build up resources and just cast my cultivates and my mana rocks and my draw spells or whatever, like I'll just eventually win because I will out-survive people.
I love these extremely contemporary Commander references. I'm sure they sound silly to other people.
So yeah, I think it's a really nice middle ground, and I was surprised at how good the aggro decks were. One of the things I remarked in the first game of Star Magic was like, man, maybe 40 life is one of the things I really dislike about Commander, because it felt like life totals mattered immediately. And I'm so used to in Commander being like, well, life totals will matter for the last 20% of the game, maybe. But for the most part, life totals are kind of irrelevant in that format, and getting attacked for a little bit of damage here or there is not a thing. But you have 2 opponents, and they're like, well, I'll attack you for 4, I'll attack you for 3, and you're like, I'm at 13. And it's like, now that's almost half my life total, right? Like, I felt that the aggressive decks were way more viable than I would have expected going into this format.
Definitely, yeah.
We've kind of already mentioned this, but I did really like also how the cards scaled up. Again, in these cubes, not designed for this format in particular. There was nothing that like became broken, I would say, but there were some cards that became way better. And it was interesting to like see how they worked, but they often weren't as much better as you kind of alluded to as they would be in like a 4-player free-for-all or 5-player free-for-all, because the ones that get really good are the ones that each opponent, but you only have 2 opponents, so they only get like doubled in efficacy rather than, tripled or quadrupled in efficacy, which makes a big difference.
Huge difference. I mean, a lot of the cards are, like whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, gain a life, it's like doubled is good. It was enough that I was still excited to pick up cards that scaled in a unique way in this multiplayer environment.
Right.
But not so much that I was like, oh, now we're just being crushed by this, and this is the only thing that matters.
Precisely. It's exactly what it was. It was like a fun recontextualization where I was like, oh, Newscraft Mob is better here. It's not
Managorger
way
Hydra,
better.
Pretty good.
Yeah, like it's better. It's not way better. It's not broken, but it's like enough better that I'm like looking at it with a little bit of interest. But it's not a situation where it's like, okay, now that the rules are changed, this 10% of the cube is all that matters, and the rest of the cards are now like 2 tiers below in power level because they don't, say each opponent or whatever. Which is something I have definitely felt in like Two-Headed Giant, for example, where I feel like some of those things scale in more dramatic ways just by the nature of how the format works.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And also, Two-Headed Giant is also not as extreme a rescaling as 4-player free-for-all.
For sure. Time to move on to second impressions. Because Anthony's face tells me he has no more first impressions.
All out of first impressions. I did think it was interesting how the spot removal still was very relevant. This is another feature I think we've seen often in multiplayer Magic, is that just destroy target creature is not as relevant, because having access to like destroy all creatures is so much more powerful. Like, you don't want to just, I guess maybe I should think about this a better way. You don't want to 1-for-1 yourself against a single opponent, because then you are setting yourself behind against the whole field, right? That's kind of one of the fundamental breaking points, or like big changes.
The classic thing in Commander is like player A removes player B's creature, and who did the best in that exchange? Players C and D.
Yeah.
Players C and D are great. They exchanged no resources and had the board controlled.
And again, sort of going back to that more subtle rescaling, like me casting my murder on my opponent's Managorger Hydra that is a real problem, is putting me behind against the field, sort of, but not to the same degree. And I think because we're starting at 20 life, like the games really mattered. Like, oh, we have to get rid of that Managorger Hydra or we're just going to lose. for all those reasons, and like again, for having like some of those cards that scale in an interesting but not totally broken way, it was still really relevant to have a lot of spot removal, and especially, as you observed, instant speed interaction.
Yeah, I really value instant speed interaction in formats like this because I don't want to be forced to decide what I'm going to do until attacks are decided. Because again, every player could attack one of their two enemies. I mean, I'm saying they should be able to attack anybody, but realistically, they're going to be choosing to attack one of their two enemies. And it's much easier for me to do the math of like, if I'm looking at you and you're my enemy, and I look at your other enemy who's my ally or, pseudo ally, that's a pretty easy sort of calculus of like, who is he going to attack, right? I feel like there's a lot more of like the sort of coin flip or the emotional decision making when it's like a whole big table and it's like, well, they could attack any of these other players and do whatever they want, when it's like, it's either me or them. Which of these two binaries is like the better choice?
Yeah, that's a really great point. Just from like a player perception and decision-making context, it is so much easier for me to look at two players and say, well, they have more creatures, so they're the threat, or they have more cards in hand, or like pick some metric to choose. Whereas if I'm looking at three players, that is such a bigger jump in terms of complexity of, well, they have more cards in hand, but they have more creatures, but they have a commander that I'm scared of. We're blurring whether we're talking about commander or just
it's the most popular multiplayer format. I think it's reasonable to sort of cite commander as some precedent for this.
I know this player, and I know exactly the kind of scary late game cards they're going to have, so they're a threat for this like more nebulous, mysterious reason. But just looking at two players, it is a lot easier just to make a decision about who you think is a threat between them.
So I think that's a big benefit, and I do really think that as far as politics of multiplayer games, like this is a sweet spot compared to a free-for-all with, 4 players or more. Because again, of the idea that like, I looked at my ally and I say, look, our shared enemy is a big problem right now. One of us has to deal with that Manticore Hydra, one of us has to deal with whatever, but also knowing that like they are not really invested in whether I live or die because that's not their win condition. They don't need to kill me. They don't need me to live. They might want to keep me alive for a while because it distracts our mutual enemy from attacking them, which is like a mutual benefit. It's a much more sort of gray area, where I feel like the sort of strategy of politicking is much more realistic, where it's like, look, in our second game last night, you had the most terrifying board state, but I had a window where I thought I could kill you, but it would basically leave me tapped out of resources and tapped out of blockers effectively for a turn.
Can we linger a little longer on my incredibly scary board state before we go to how you took it apart?
It was a great board state, and then I turned to the person that was also your enemy, so my pseudo ally, and was like, look, if I deal with Anthony right now, and I also knew from his board state that like he kind of wasn't going to be able to deal with you, so like this was kind of very appealing option for him because if he was going to win the game, I kind of had to kill you for him to get there. I was like, will you do what you can to help me from one turn from my enemy, who is actually your pseudo ally, right? Now that's where it becomes interesting. And it's like, okay, is he willing to make this trade, right? And that's like a thing you could actually put through like strategic game theory problem solving and not just purely emotional, do I like you and want to help you or do I not like you and don't want to help you, which I feel like so often in Commander, it comes down to that sort of just emotional level because there's too many game theory variables to possibly manage. I will say, because we'll get comments about this, I do think in CEDH specifically, you see this pop up again because the players are so invested, they actually care about all of those variables, and you do see this sort of like...
They're not putting Vindicate on the stack and saying, what's the biggest threat here?
Right, yeah, they're thinking about it. So I think in CEDH, I have never played CEDH in any sort of real way, but my understanding is that players that are really invested, like, this becomes a thing again, because...
They're so invested, they're willing to sit in the same room for 18 hours while they play a single game. That speaks to their level of investment.
But yeah, for me, this is like the sweet spot of politics in a multiplayer game because of the really cool gray area of we have some shared goals and some differing goals with the two people sitting next to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually something I hadn't thought about, but there being some level of explicit shared goals really changes the dynamic because it's not about here's 4 players on totally equal footing and somebody, I mean, you can speak to how notoriously I hate this. If somebody's like, hey, don't attack me next turn and I will do this. Like, we will do explicit politics and like make a deal together. I know you're trying to win the game, so you're lying to me. You think you can win the game by making a deal with me.
Right. You wouldn't offer that deal unless you thought it made you more likely to win, which in free-for-all means explicitly the person you're trying to make a deal with dying.
Right. Whereas here it's like, we do have a shared enemy. Like, both people can be legitimately invested in collaborating and making a certain decision, which is so much more interesting to me. And I think like opens up a lot more interesting space for, you get to actually make sort of game theory strategic decisions.
Yeah, it's like there's multiple stages of the game almost, and like in the there's still 5 players stage of the game, Nate doesn't care whether I live or die. And I don't care whether Nate lives or dies, which is why it's to say, like, I look at Nate's board state. I was trying to keep this anonymous. It was Nate. I look at Nate's board state and I say, Nate can't deal with Anthony's board. I have a window where I think I can kill Anthony. here's a moment where Nate is, for this instant, willing to make a deal with me, and I have no expectation that, like, once Anthony's gone, if it all works out, and we're in, like, a new game of geopolitics, that deal will, like, stand up. We're not teammates for the rest of the game, but we are teammates right now in this moment for a thing that matters, and then dynamics will change, and, like, we'll move on. But you get to, like, solve individual problems kind of as they come up, and then the sort of landscape of the game changes.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe that's an interesting way to think about it, is as sort of multi-stage game, and I think oftentimes we'll think about games of Magic having those kind of stages, like kind of like chess has the early game, the mid game, and then the late game.
Yep, that's the one.
Right?
You nailed it.
I was like, wait, is there something else in there?
The
it's the
end game.
developing phase, and then we're sort of building up resources, and now we're in like a race phase, or in like a standstill kind of phase. Like there's different types of configurations of a sort of normal two-player game state. Here, there's like a very clear change when the first player is eliminated, because if somebody to their left or right dies, somebody's going to win. Like the game ends when two adjacent players lose. So in a sense, as soon as somebody's knocked out, it is everybody except for one person's top priority to protect the last person there. So there's
Correct.
like a real interesting sort of change in priorities that can happen.
Which is very different, yeah.
And you can anticipate that as well. You can say like, well, I really can't protect this person, so I need to stop the first person from being eliminated too.
We had the interesting situation in our first game last night where a player had a commanding lead, and
It was me.
no, first
Damn
game.
it.
First game. A player had a commanding lead, and they had one ally and one enemy that were dead. So they had an ally left and an enemy left. I'm trying to lay this out. I hope you can follow listening to this. They had a very commanding board state such that they could kill their enemy at any time, like at will. The exact board state was they had a blood artist, a bunch of small creatures that if they either got through or died in combat, were going to kill. It was me. I was the person that was their enemy. But if they just killed me, it ended in a draw with them and their ally, their supposed ally, because they were the only two players left and both their two enemies were dead. So now it's really shifted, and it's like, that player's not your ally basically at all anymore. Like, now you have to either kill both of us in the same combat if you want the solo win, which is what he ended up doing. He ended up pulling that off. Or, like, you're just playing for a tie. And how much you care to play for a tie, or if you want to call it a shared win, whatever you want to call it, is up to you. Somebody in the Discord sort of alluded to the fact that, like, they would be trying to play for the shared win. Like, that would be the point of playing this format for them. I think it's much more interesting if every player is, like, striving to win solo and, like, get full credit for it, and then we'll settle for a tie if they need to, which is what happened in the second game, which is that I'm not going to try and lay out the whole board state for the second game, but suffice it to say, a player in the second game had the option of either losing or essentially forcing a shared win with one of their allies by killing a player that, was otherwise on the battlefield, and they chose that option, which was, it was cool to see both ends, but that's where I feel like it's so important that, like, if we get to that state and the dominant player is not allowed to attack their ally, so the only thing they can possibly hope for is a tie between their remaining ally and themselves, that makes no sense to me. So that's why I feel so strongly you should be able to attack.
Yeah, and that is kind of a funny space to get into, where it's like, okay, my ally has a deterministic win on board. They're going to kill their second opponent next turn. I'm just going to attack him and kill him, and then we don't have to worry about that. And then the game's going to be in a little bit of a weird state. I think that's another thing that's worth mentioning compared to a full free-for-all is the game ends when two players are eliminated, so even though the game can go on for a long time, and that's something else we should talk about.
Two adjacent players.
When two adjacent players lose, the game ends pretty quickly. Like, it's not a kind of situation where there are two players left slogging it out, like, trying to figure out their combos. Like, that end phase where somebody has been eliminated and is no longer actively participating in Cube Night for a bit doesn't last very long, is what I mean.
On average, that has definitely been the case, which is nice, because there's not, like, a lot of downtime where you're standing around waiting for the next Star Magic draft, but these two players are just going at it, because there's always at least three people in the game remaining, and honestly, I feel like a lot of games end when the second player is eliminated. It's oftentimes two adjacent players.
Yeah.
And so really you have one person that's waiting for some amount of time. And as soon as you're down to just four players, again, the dynamics change a lot such that that phase can be kind of accelerated. I'm hesitant to say that's universal, though, because I think it's going to depend a lot on the nature of the cube, which is where I think we should go now, which is talk a little bit about the cubes we played this with and sort of anything we learned from doing that. I did 3 of these Star Magic drafts with my Sacred Geometry cube, which is my cube that is all about playing mechanically simple, easy to grok, iconic cards and letting the complexity come from the interactions between them. Then we also did 2 games with the regular cube, which is your cube, which has very similar goals, though I do think you have a higher complexity budget than I do in Sacred Geometry, and you also have a much more conscious, sort of narrower power level band. I'm not focusing on power level as much. I'm like, sure, put Demonic Tutor and Pacifism in side by side. They're both clean and simple. That's all I care about. You'll run more non-evergreen mechanics, some more cards with a little bit of complexity, but the sort of power level band is much narrower.
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation of it. It's like we've got Psi Master Thopterist, who has multiple different abilities, but the artifact density is tuned in a way that, you're going to make 2 Thopters and feel great about it.
I think both these cubes were actually great for Star Magic, especially for, our first experience with it. And what I appreciate about both of them is that pound for pound, these are both cubes that are relatively simple in the grand scheme of like what you could do with a cube in 2026 with access to 30,000 individual cards or whatever. Like, there are so many complicated, wordy cards, and I think this experience would have been less enjoyable if I was looking across the table at my enemy with one player sitting between us and trying to be like, what does that card even do? I don't even know what that card does. When the cards are all easy to communicate what they do or very grokkable, I think that was a benefit to us for sure.
Definitely. And I wonder if some of those other aspects of sort of the gameplay and player motivations also affect kind of the overall board state complexity that, people are still motivated to play some spot removal and interact with their opponent more. I do think that's still a big risk, is that with 5 players, you could end up with huge, crazy board states and lots of triggers to keep track of. And so the choice of cube is definitely going to really, really impact how that plays out. And if that ends up being just like too much.
Between the 2 cubes, I think regular cube has a little more possibility for like synergistic decks that will like do more stuff.
Make
on
a reasonable
turn.
Number of squirrels and then have a lot of death triggers when those squirrels have a bad day.
I will say that I felt in those games, I had a little bit of the feeling I used to have all the time in Commander, which is like just waiting around. I did have a little bit of that, where it's like, all right, well, there's 4 other players have to take their turn before I get to go again. And I'm invested in what's going on because of all the political things we just mentioned. I should say I'm also a lot more invested, certainly in the early turns, than I am in like a Commander game, where it's like, all right, I'm just going to be building up resources forever. My life total doesn't matter for the next, 50% of this game anyway. Like, there I really checked out. It's like, all right, you do whatever you're going to do, and then I'll come back to my turn later. Here, I was more invested, but I did definitely hit a point where I think we played with some players that were a little more slow and deliberate in this pod. I don't think it was all the cube choice, but I also think that the board was a little bigger and a little more complicated, and so people were just taking a little more time to make their decisions. I did feel a little bit of that, and so that's maybe a thing to be conscious of, is that if it's already a complicated cube where people are taking long turns, that long turn thing is going to be multiplied, many-fold when you have 5 players instead of 2.
Yeah, and I think that's also an important thing just to say explicitly, is that it's still multiplayer Magic. It still takes a lot longer. And so, we did 2 drafts back to back where we played a single game, rather than 3 full rounds of, maximum of 9 games.
And last night we didn't even get a second draft in. We
just redrafted
played a draft
decks.
and did a game that ended up taking much longer than we expected. And we're like, let's just play another game. And that'll take us basically until the end of the Cube Night.
I think that still, for our purposes, still fits into the structure of Cube Night in a great way.
For sure,
to do
absolutely.
2 drafts. But depending on how you run events, might not work as well. Just be aware that the games do take a while.
I don't think we had any cards that really scaled up in toxic ways. The closest ones to scaling up in toxic waves were...
This is very funny, by the way, but... Yeah, what is it?
What's funny about this?
I just think it seems like such an innocuous card, and for that to be like, oh, this is the thing that was really frustrating, was Soul's Attendant. This 1 mana 1/1, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, gain 1 life.
Same thing, basically. But
same thing.
Yeah, Soul Warden was a bit of a problem. Blood Artist was a little bit of a problem. Specifically 2 Blood Artists, when Nate made a copy of Blood Artist with Saheeli and was like, now I have 2 Blood Artists. It's like, ugh.
I was out of the game at that point, so I thought it was cool.
But they were not, again, those are both 1 toughness creatures. Simply remove them, dog. It is not that hard. The other thing I'll say is that with these cube selections, I've expected maybe to see a lot of cards in the pack where I'm like, in this format, I'm just fully never interested in this card. And there were very few of those, right? There was some bunny rabbit in the regular cube that taps at sorcery speed to give a creature +1/+1 until end of turn. And I was like, I do not want this in my multiplayer Magic format. But that was the exception. There were very few cards that I was like, this has transformed in this context in a way that I don't want to play it at all.
I agree, and I think that part of that might just be a little bit of our bias going into this, and I'd be curious if we did a lot more of these, if our feelings would change. Specifically, I was looking at a lot of those cards and still thinking the dedicated aggro cards are not going to be very good here. I do want to go a little bit slower. I want to be having a synergistic late game engine that's not as extreme as in Commander, but still a little bit more. And I wouldn't be surprised if we would play this more, and that turned out not to be the case. And there was real potential for decks to be aggressive enough that they can just get out ahead of the game.
Well, yeah, I can say my predilection going into all these drafts was I want to be playing at instant speed. I want to have targeted removal. And I want things that are going to disincentivize attacking me, like your Perilous Mirrors or whatever. I was thinking very much in the sort of turtle up and just sit back strategy. And I felt punished in a lot of the games because I was like, well, both my opponents are playing creature decks. I don't have enough resources to control both of them, so I need some help from some of my pseudo allies to help control them. And when I'm the one that's sitting there with like blue mana untapped and like drawing a bunch of cards, of course they're attacking me. They're like, yeah, I'm not going to let you sit there and just build up resources. And my life total is only 20. So I think aggro is like actually pretty viable here, like way more viable than you might be thinking. Something I wish I had said earlier is just that like you and I, we don't like multiplayer Magic, and we both had a pretty good time doing this.
I think we've said that.
Well, maybe people that have listened to this podcast for a long time
in specific words, but I think that's become clear.
Like I said last night when we were walking home from the brewery, like I have to be in the like bottom 10% of like Magic demographics in terms of like likelihood to like a multiplayer Magic format. Like almost every Magic player I know enjoys multiplayer Magic more than I do, and I still had a lot of fun playing Star Magic and would actively choose this with 5 players over any other option. Like if that's how the pods are breaking down, this is what I want to do. That's, I think, a big vote for giving this a try if the next time you have 5 players in your pod and are trying to make something happen. I want to talk about combat tricks for a second because it is a card type that I historically have not been the biggest fan of in cube environments. I feel like they're oftentimes kind of like gotcha cards, and they make the caster feel really smart even though they didn't actually do anything smart. They just waited until their opponent had a removal spell or blocked and then used their combat
and then
trick.
Did a smart thing by using their combat trick. It makes them very smart.
But I was actively taking and very happy to play combat tricks in Star Magic games specifically because I think a really good way to win a game of Star Magic is to, right before you go, essentially have one of your allies wipe out your shared enemy so that you're down to one enemy and then be able to alpha strike that one enemy on your turn. And it didn't end up actually happening, but what I was hoping to use the combat tricks to do was like, let's say my ally is attacking their 2 opponents and neither of these are lethal attacks. They're just attacking them to try and get their life totals down, somewhat equally. I could then all of a sudden turn that attack into a lethal attack against our shared enemy. Like you didn't realize that you were going to actually kill them. Like maybe strategically you didn't want to kill them right now because of the way that changes the politics of the table. And now I can actually buff your creature, kill our shared enemy. A turn or 2 later, I get to untap and just kill the remaining enemy of mine and play like that, which I think is very cool. This is maybe the sort of context in which I am most excited to play combat tricks, provided they say target creature, not target creature you control.
Yeah, that's again a big like card choice question. And if you were building a cube, specifically expecting to play some Star Magic with it, I would definitely try to include more cards that are more flexible, I think, in general. That brings up a really interesting question to me, though. I feel like there might be a term for this that I just am not aware of, but you've played Munchkin, right?
Twice.
Great. I feel like people that have played Munchkin have learned very quickly after maybe 2 games, maybe just 1, that the like optimal strategy is you just like hold all your resources, hold all your go up a level cards, never blink. And then somebody eventually goes first, like they try to go for those last couple levels. They blink, and that person loses. And it's always like the second or third person to like follow through on dumping all their resources all at once is the person that wins. Does that experience kind of make sense?
That experience aligns with my experience. Again, I've only played 2 games of Munchkin, and it was 12 years ago. So if you're a Munchkin head, don't come at me. I don't actually know this game from anything. But
I think there's something kind of like in the right setting, if that's what you're expecting, I can enjoy that experience. But it can also be kind of just like, okay, we just have to like do the staring contest and figure out who's going to try and go first and can everybody else actually bring them down. And I think that multiplayer Magic, again, can be similar, where it's like somebody's going to go first, people are going to use their interaction.
CDH can be like that a lot, especially.
Yeah. And I think that Star Magic has a little bit of this. Like, to your point about instant speed removal, I was also really looking for things with haste, especially, in our second draft of this, after I had a little bit of experience. I thought threaten effects were going to be pretty powerful because I could, again, like, threaten a win out of nowhere when people are not expecting. You also have more to shop
around from in terms of what cards you want to steal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, I take your blocker, but it's actually also a creature that attacks very well into my other opponent. Like, I think that's cool.
For sure.
I don't know. So do you think that there is a little bit of that challenge of like everybody trying to save up their resource and then go for the win all at once? Or do you think there's enough other stuff that kind of balances that out?
That was definitely not my experience at this game. As the person that was trying to do that from the start, I struggled to do that in most of our games. One card I would say that actually, I think, quietly changed a lot in evaluation was
Mortar Pod.
Temporal Manipulation.
Okay.
Or Time Walk, if you like. A card that took an extra turn felt great. And it's actually how I won the 2 games that I won, because...
That was frustrating.
Well, it's because everyone's doing the math of like, okay, well, I can survive 1 attack at least. So I know that I'm going to get to untap again from this particular enemy. And the math of like, okay, I'm going to get to attack and then untap and attack again before anybody else gets to do anything, because I guess you had to take 2 turns back to back. That sort of surprise element ended up really playing quite well and was how I sort of managed to get those 2 games down. So I don't think that you can really afford to just sit back and build up your resources, because unlike a free-for-all game, you'd have 2 dedicated enemies that are just like, well, I'm going to attack you. And you could argue in other games, it's like, well, if it's a free-for-all game, like, why are you attacking me? I haven't done anything threatening. You should attack the threatening player. It's like, well, the threatening player is not my enemy in this game. Like, they're doing something else. They're my ally, and they're being threatening, and I love that for them because we're going to basically have this mutual enemy and, like, try and defeat them together and then go about trying to accomplish our separate goals. I don't think this suffers from that problem.
It's so funny. I've never thought about Time Walk and Giant Growth as playing a similar role in a game of Magic, but they really, like, you are trying to disrupt your opponent's expectations of the rhythm of the game and of the clock. And when you have 5 players at the table and everybody's trying to navigate that clock and do that kind of balancing act of, I want to kill my opponents, but not so quickly that another one of my opponents can take advantage of it, those little edges can really, really matter.
Yeah, the instant speed combat tricks are great, too, because it's also like, not only is it I will make you accidentally kill one of your enemies when you didn't expect to, thus throwing off the politics of the table. It's also, okay, I'm going to use this combat trick to buff a player's blocker to kill the big creature that we all care about. That's actually the problem, right? And maybe it's, my ally's blocker that's blocking my enemy's, good attacker. I'm not even involved. It's not even attacking me, but I'm just going to go ahead and use this as a removal spell when I like it more because there's more of those moments of opportunity to, like, find a spot where the combat trick is good. And also, you don't have to make those moments yourself in your own deck, right?
Interesting, yeah. So the thing that you were frustrated by is, I kept up my green mana the whole turn, and now Blossoming Defense is great. Like, that was my whole plan executed. Now it's like, oh, this is actually a very novel situation, and I really am kind of motivated to do something weird with this Blossoming Defense.
It felt like there was more to think about, right? Like, obviously, you use Blossoming Defense when your opponent goes to remove your creature, but here it's like, is my creature really what matters the most for my overall goals in this game? Maybe not. Like, maybe what matters is that my ally gets to keep their one creature that is, like, in the one game we had, where a player had a Soul Warden and did make it up to, like, 30 plus life. I only didn't worry about that because my ally had a Colonian Hydra that was at 16 +1/+1 counters. And I was like, well, I need to keep that Colonian Hydra alive more than anything because I'm never getting that player down from, 38 life to 0. But this Colonian Hydra will do it in like one hit. So I would have absolutely let my opponent removal spell my creature to save my opponent's Colonian Hydra in that situation. It makes the sort of texture of, like, when do you actually use your combat trick, to me, less of a, like, obvious answer, which makes it more interesting and fun to play with.
And I wonder if also, like, my preference is definitely for Mana War over Exclusion Mage, and I think maybe yours is too.
Sure.
It's definitely like in Sacred Geometry.
Absolutely.
It's just like a simpler wording. So there might have been some things that are, like, quietly going for us in the cubes that we chose that was, kind of just an accident, but worked out.
The one thing I don't love about Mana War compared to Exclusion Mage is that you can't play it on an empty board. I wish it said up to one other creature. That would be my ideal Mana War, personally, mechanically.
We all have our ideal Mana War. Yeah. Describe your ideal Mana War.
And I get it. It's cool when your opponent plays a Mana War and you kill your own creature so they bounce their own Mana War back to their hand. That's so cool.
So cool. We love that.
It's not that cool. Sorry. In summary, I like this format. I think it is a really nice balance of multiplayer Magic and 1v1 Magic in terms of the game incentives and how much politics matter. It's like a really nice sweet spot in between. If you like multiplayer Magic, I have no doubt you will love this because the only things that I had reservations about this format were related to my distaste for multiplayer Magic. And so if you already like that, I think you're going to really enjoy this. I think the draft is great. I think drafting your decks is really fun. I think you can do it with pretty much any cube. I mean, there's probably some extreme ones it would be very weird to do it with. I think on average, most cubes you could just pick up and draft with 5 players and play a Star Magic game, and it would not be problematic.
Turbo Cube Star Magic.
I was thinking Turbo Cube, and I was thinking 100 Ornithopters. I'm like, well,
yeah, name the 2 weirdest cubes in the playgroup.
Yeah, I think it would be fine. I think it would work, honestly. That's a big benefit to it. It is genuinely what I will be doing if I find myself in a 5-player pod for the foreseeable future. It's nice that if you do have, let's say you have an 8 and a 5 and you're trying to figure out how to break things apart, you can then just be like, who's interested in Star Magic? And some people are probably more interested than others. Some people maybe are not interested. They can play in the 8 pod. It's like players can sort of decide what they're interested in. Yeah, if you're designing a cube for this format, I think I would avoid things that are limited to targeting your own creatures and optionally also limited to targeting only your opponent's creatures. I think having options for it to target only opens up more interesting gameplay and more sort of possibility for collaboration over certain goals with your common players. I would be wary of how many things you include that say each player for both tracking and power level reasons, just like, keep an eye on that.
Yeah, but I would say sometimes it's kind of interesting, sometimes it maybe is too much. Like, I really enjoyed Innocent Blood, that just everybody sacrifices a creature. It's like,
so sick.
It's kind of cool that I can interact with my allies at the same time, and I will choose to use my Innocent Blood versus targeted removal in very different contexts in the game. So I think that having some variety is still good. It's just something to be aware of.
One card which I was worried might be problematic, but was actually ended up being fine, was I had Consecrated Sphinx in Sacred Geometry.
That does sound problematic.
And that's potentially problematic, but ended up being pretty okay. You have more opponents, but that also means more opportunities for them to find removal spells, and it does only say when an opponent casts a spell, so it doesn't care about your allies casting spells.
Oh, right. That's...
Newscraft Mob cares about any player casting spells, like Mana Gorge or Hydra, but Consecrated Sphinx doesn't, so I would just be conscious of that, and moreover, just be, like, consistent, because I think some of the, like, weird edges we found were, like, Keen Sense is an aura that says whenever this creature deals combat damage to an opponent, draw a card. So now I can't be incentivized to attack my ally or whatever, or I can't put this on an opponent's creature wanting to draw cards when they hit me because, which you also can't do 1v1 Magic, but you know.
Yeah, no, there's like things that you would just write off, like differences that just don't matter, where you'd shortcut 2 cards to be the same, that suddenly do matter, and it's worth, like considering the sort of multiplayer ramifications of cards. If
it were me, if I were designing a cube, I would basically make sure that anything I can target a creature can target any creature, and there's never any restrictions on, your opponent controls or you control, for simplicity's sake.
I mean, and like targeted draw, being able to...
Targeted card draw, so sick.
Have one of your allies draw 2, gain 2, or draw 2, lose 2. Sign in Blood is the good one, right?
Sign in Blood is the instant speed one for black that is targeted.
One of them can target your opponents, which is great.
Knight's Whisper is not targeted, so you can't kill them with it because you can't make them lose 2 life. Anyway.
It's been Sign in Blood chat.
Sign in Blood, Knight's Whisper chat. Like Fact or Fiction says, an opponent has to make piles, which it would be stupid if you could have your teammate make piles.
Yeah, that's a case where it's good that it's opponent.
There are probably some cards that if you were trying to break this format, you definitely could. Like there's so many cards printed that, you could find some cards that, would just be messed up in this particular context, but I think the average cube is probably just fine to draft like this. I want to emphasize how much it is not Commander, and it feels much more like regular Magic, and the sort of overlapping incentives with the players at the table creates a really interesting dynamic, which I found a lot of fun to navigate compared to a free-for-all table.
I would say my overall impression is I was excited to try this kind of as a weird, wacky novelty, and I was surprised that it was novel, but not a weird, wacky novelty. It was still just like an interesting way to play Magic.
Great way to put it.
I think that definitely I will maintain the expectation that it is like a bigger commitment in terms of time per game. It's going to be a big board state, so like make sure I'm up for that. But absolutely, we'll treat it as a serious way to play if we have a funny number of players.
Yeah. I guess one small logistical thing I want to say, because I think it's interesting, is that if you do end up doing back-to-back drafts or back-to-back games, you can change the seating order such that everybody who was enemies is now allies, and it works for all 5 players at the table. So with the same 5 players, you can basically play a game where 2 of the remaining 4 are your enemies, and a game where 2 of the remaining 4 are your allies, which is a nice way to like mix up the seating between those 2 drafts.
I feel like there's a lot of other little logistical ticky-tacky stuff that maybe we kind of elided, like you choose exactly which player you're attacking, only they can block. I think we should just say, we'll update the page on the website to have a little bit more detail about
anything we didn't mention is normal Magic.
Yeah.
Which is most things. It's mostly normal Magic.
Mostly normal Magic.
Yeah. We just
Great
we just have to clarify who counts as an opponent, who counts as a player, and I think it's worth clarifying that you can't attack anybody because some people have it in their head that you shouldn't be able to attack. Like, if no one had ever said that, I don't even think we have to say you can attack any player. It's just a given in any game of Magic of all time, but it's worth sort of clarifying that because some people have played that you cannot attack your allies, which I will strongly advocate against.
I feel conflicted, but ultimately agree with you.
And that's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you want to support the show on Patreon, you can do that. I think this will probably be the last week. We haven't mentioned it, but the Lorwyn Eclipsed survey is up. I think Lorwyn is a cool set. I haven't talked with you about it. I'm not sure how much you'd like it or not, but I've heard a lot of players talking about how they feel like it is one of the best sort of Magic sets they've seen in recent history. It feels like a return to old school Magic in some ways that they really like. I'm excited about the cards for my cubes. So we have a survey up for every set. We don't mention it for stupid Spider-Man or whatever because we don't care, but it's there. You can find it if you want, but I'm mentioning it right now for Lorwyn Eclipse. This will be the last week it's up. So that'll be linked in the show notes. The Star Magic page on our website will be linked in the show notes. And P.O. Box 4855, Baltimore, Maryland 21211 if you want to write a note to the show.
And that's Star Magic.
That's Star Magic. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty, and the show is edited by Handsome Matthew. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is produced by Thinking Really Hard About Magic Cards and speaking into microphones about it. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for the gift of trying a new, not so weird and wacky, and actually kind of interesting format.
I had a great time. I'm into it. And also, positive feedback from everybody. Nobody that played in any of these pods was like, ugh, that was not for me. Everybody was like, yeah, that was good.
That's honestly a great note.
Yeah.